Good day and welcome back to our series on filters within Tableau, where we look at the different types of filters and look at how to implement them. Now, we've already looked at some of the basics, what is a filter, some of the classes like global filter we've covered, as well as extract and data source filters. We've also dipped our toes into the accessible filters by looking at the context filter. And next we will be looking at the dimension filter. After that, in upcoming episodes of the series, we'll also have a specific focus on measure filters, date filters, and then also looking at cascading filters. So do stay tuned, lots of information coming up and lots to learn as well. But first, let's dive into the data that we are working with. The data which we are looking at, as mentioned, is from the Kaggle website, and it's a CSV file, which is also available obviously from our site, and you'll find the link in the comment section. This is basically one CSV file with about 24,000 lines and a few columns. What you will notice in here as well is it ranges from the time that Kickstarter was brought to life back in April 2009 until January 2018 is the most recent data we have in there. Now, let's just run through each of the fields to understand what each of them are used for, as we'll obviously be using this in our filtering as well. So firstly, we have the ID field, which is a unique identifier with the name of the project. We also have a category as well as a main category in which this project is listed on the Kickstarter website. We have a country indicator. We'll notice that a lot of them are already from the US, being a US entity, but there are also a number of other countries in there. We have a date that the project was launched on Kickstarter, so when we are starting to look for backers. We also have a deadline at the time that the project closes, the currency that the amounts are in. So we've got a goal and a pledged amount. So obviously goal is the amount or the target that needs to be reached for this project to be continuing, and the pledged amount as well, which has already at this point in time when this extract was made, is the amount which has been received for this project or pledged as such. Then we also have a state with indicating the state of the project. It's not state as in geographical references, but more on the state, so we can see some of the project failed, some have been successful, others are still live. And next we've got total number of backers thus far, also the goal and the pledged in USD amount, as we do have some in the local currency for these entities. And that's in essence the file which we'll take forward to the next section. So let's have a look at dimension filters. We are still busy with accessible filters. This is our next type which we'll be looking at, and this one is probably one you'll be using most of the time as well, as it is quite robust and a lot of the time what you'll use to filter your data on. Alright, so basically you can think of this as a SQL where clause if you're familiar with SQL, as it is used for non-aggregated variables. It's called the dimension filter because we are using our dimensions, which are normally discrete variables as well, and normally it is identified by a blue pill. So if we open up a new worksheet and we drag in, for instance, the main category to filter, and we just select all of them, and we drag in the main category, let's just see, sorry, the category in there as well, and we select all of them. You can see that it distinguishes it with a blue pill. I want to just show you, we'll get to measure filters later on as well, but if I do put that in, you'll see it's a green pill as well. So normally that's how we can distinguish between the different filter types in the filter shelf. So there's obviously a couple of ways we can do this, and I showed you already, is if we just drag it into the filter to be adding it on there. And as soon as we drag it on there, I'll just do it one more time so we can look at the different options we are being given. If we look at the options, so firstly it opens up with 4 tabs at the top. We are normally presented with all the options of this dimension in a list and a few different things. So firstly we can select all of them, and all of them will be part of the filter or none. We can also select individual ones, and that's only ones that will be going in, or we can click exclude and it will be excluding the ones we have selected and only showing the remaining options in there. I'll untick that. So we can also create a custom list, which if we wanted to, or we can just straightforward use all, which is normally what we do for interactive filters as such. All right, what you can see as well at the bottom here, there's this little summary. So it's only on the first tab. You can see which field is being categorized, what the selection is at the moment. If I say all, how many values. It also gives a little summary of what we've entered in the wildcard tab, what we entered in the condition, and then obviously on the limit as well. So what we can do with the remaining ones, so if we don't want to select necessarily everything from the list, is we can add a wildcard. Now this works very well as well. If we wanted to look at specifically all the categories that contains the word art, or starts with the word art, or whatever the case might be, we can add it in here and it will pick up all of that. Again, once we can also say exclude those ones that doesn't contain that, for instance. Okay, and we also can then move over. Let's just take that off. We can move into condition. Now condition gives you the option to be a bit more robust here. So we can also look at some of the measures in here. So don't confuse it now, because we are still working with a category, but we can say on a specific condition. So if we are looking at, let's use pledged USD, which is the USD amount of all the pledged, or the amount that was pledged for all of the projects. If we want to say, let us only give the categories where the average is greater than 10,000 US dollars. So this would cut down our list quite a bit. If you're unsure what number to put there, we can always just hit load over here and put 100,000. This would then output the only categories that had more than 100,000. So to see that, let's put a chart again. Let's look at what would make sense. Let's take the different categories, or the main categories, into row, as well as the number of records. So we can see the only category that had that, or the main category, was technology. Let's also put in the normal category so we can see a little breakdown. Perhaps there were more. So in fact, there were only 10 projects, because we are working with the number of records. Let's just double check. We're working with the number of records there. So there were only 10 projects where the amount pledged was more than 100,000. So we can change that obviously and decrease that as we need to. So let's say 1,000 for instance, and apply, and you can see now there's way more. So again, that's working on the category and where the amount was more than 1,000. All right. So that is our condition, and obviously we are given also a space where we can type it out. So if we wanted to make some more complex ones, we can say, if the pledged amount is greater than 1,000, or the average pledged amount was greater than 1,000, and the sum of, let's use for instance the goal in USD is greater than 2 million, for instance, or so forth, we can type it out here. And as you can see, it's not possible to do it the first option, but we can do it in here. So I'll just hit none and we can go over to the top records. So top is exactly what it says. It takes the top number of items as we specify it. So if we are looking at the top 5 categories, so we are working with the categories again. So we can just type the value 5, for instance, and say where the goal, for instance, if we use the goal in USD, the total of that. So if we hit apply, we can see that the top 5 categories are listed here with their main categories, and these are the number of records. And actually this way it makes sense to rather use the goal in there, and you can see what the amounts have been. So these are the total, these are the total number of, the total top 5, which is quite handy as well. So as you can see, we could also have changed it. So if we, to go back into that view, as you saw, we edit the filter, is we could also have swapped this around to use the bottom 5, or we could once again use the formula to use the top or bottom of a specific number in there. A nice little trick in here as well, as you can see, we can define the number that we want to see. But if you want to give your user a bit more of a nicer experience, as we always like to do, we can create a parameter. So I'll just hit OK for now and go and create the parameter. We just right click and say not calculated field, but parameter, and we can say this, we'll just call this the please choose the top X to display, and we'll just use this as integer. We know it will always be an integer, and let's give it a range of between 1 and 5, and the step will be 1. If you need more help on parameters, have a look at the help file of Tableau. It is quite handy, but this is quickly how you can create it. So we've selected the parameter, we've created the parameter. Let's go and select it within our filter, and we said we want to see the top 5, and now there is not 5. We don't want to choose 5 anymore. We actually want to choose the parameter which we displayed there, and we hit OK. So to show this parameter control, you can see we've got options 1 through to 5 to show the top 5, and let's just go in there again. We can obviously let's edit the this one over here. Let's say make it top 10. We can choose up to the top 10 of those. So really handy if you want to make it nicer for your make it much nicer for your audience. Okay, so now the question is that the only way that we can add, maybe let's call this, let's just change this name over here, the top goal projects. Yeah, that's sufficient. So let's just say, is this now the only way we can do this? And the answer is no. So if we just create a normal sheet, no filters have been applied, and we add in our category, or our let's choose our main category. You'll see it pulls through the country, as we've specified that earlier, that it needs to be applicable to all of the using the data source. So if we just have a look at this specifically and see what's the total number of backers. So let's include the number of backers. Now those are the people that are obviously paying for these projects. Let's say we want to filter, let's add in the category as well. And let's put this into a bar chart. Now let's see if we wanted to only see a specific category. So for instance, comics. How can we add that to the filter? Now there's a couple of ways. You can click on the heading and say filter, which would open up the filter tab. You can double click on a specific category and it would add the category in automatically, so in comics as that case. Or you can, let's just undo that, or you can choose on your dimension to say we want to see on main category, show the filter, and it automatically adds a filter for category. So if we do deselect now some of these, you'll see they are starting to disappear and the list becoming smaller. So those are a couple of ways how you can add it in, whatever works for you or whatever section you're working on. It's quite easy to add. Another way to do that, so if we remove that, another way might also be to say, holding down your control button and say we want to see those 4, and we can say keep only. And it will only keep the ones that have been selected. Apparently there was a 5th one selected, but in any case, so those are the ones that have been selected. And you can do it the same for any number of values in there. Let's call this our main category, for our category. Actually, this is not a main category, but our category filter. So let us duplicate this sheet. And I want to show you how we can also make this a bit nicer. So if we for instance have to use the ID as a filter, so let's say add filter, what we want to prevent is these long lists of IDs that make up that. So, but our user requested to be able to type in or be able to select specific IDs. Why? Who knows? But that might be the reason that they want to do a quick lookup on a specific one. So instead of providing them with a long list to filter on like that, something which is quite easy to do is rather to use the wildcard match. And this is handy with names as well, obviously. So we can, for instance, type in the number 1286, and it would bring up everything that had the number 1286. So to show it a bit easier with the, let's take off the ID. And let's take off the category as well. Let's take names, for instance, as a filter. Now we'll have a long list of names, and some of them might not make sense. But if we were interested in a specific area, for instance, we can do the wildcard match and say, let's include the word data and see what comes up. So we can see there were actually a couple of 2 projects where we had a couple of backers for that. So it saves you a lot of space and also makes it easier for your audience to interact with your work, with your workbook. If we just, or we can call this the wildcard search, and we will save that as well. What we can also do, just go back to our category filter. So what we can also do to make this nice and interactive for our user, we'll just create a sheet called interactive, and we add in the, so we've already got country. So what we'll add in is our main category once again, and actually let's switch it up a little bit. Let's start using state and see what are the number of records in each of these states. So if we wanted to add in main category, but as a filter, so we can just say show filter, we can change and make it interactive on how it is displayed to our user. Currently, these are normal check marks. You can see the numbers changing. Let's actually make that a graph like that. Here we go. So our main category and our main category is in there with the different states of each of those. So if we wanted to make a specific selection on the categories in our graph, I'm actually going to remove that from our visualization and just use state in our visualization, actually, like that. And we can use state on color obviously as well. But based on our selection, let's make this a bit bigger. Based on our selection over here, we want to see how it changes if we include and exclude a couple, or perhaps we just want to look at one. Then we can easily change it to a single value drop-down list. You'll see there's a couple of single value and multiple value drop-down lists or options. So having a normal list is radio buttons over there. This is helpful if you only want to see one at a time. The drop-down works well if you want to save space. So again, you can go through each of those. Or the slider works also quite well. Maybe perhaps on more numerical values, but also in this case, it saves a lot of space on your dashboard. If you want to allow your user to use multiple values, we can do the multiple list as we just saw, which was the default. Or we can give them a drop down that they can select, also very useful in saving space. And lastly, we've also got the multiple values custom list. So you can create a custom list of what you want to show in there. Yes, and that's the way we can make it interactive for our users. I think is an option for every scenario that you might end up with. Maybe while we are still here, we can just have a quick look at what our options are within our filter. So to customize it, we are able to remove and show some of these items which are being displayed over here. So if we don't want to use it to be able to change specific things, we can go and amend it over there. And as we have mentioned earlier, we can also apply it to specific sheets. So that was what we did in the previous view. Perhaps just a quick word on relevant values and how we can apply that. So let us use an example where I'm going to remove this over here, this card. Let's also say we want to include the category as a filter. So show that as a filter and show it at the bottom. Space becomes a problem as mentioned earlier. And as you can see, for crafts and dance and all of that, we don't necessarily have all of the categories or the subcategories in there. For instance, art is not connected to journalism or perhaps music, theater and so forth, but art generally is art. Is linked to the main category. Almost stated the obvious over there. What we can apply to make sure that this list gets filtered by the top list is to click on the options and say we only want to see the relevant values. So if we now change these options, you can see art had art coming through, but comics doesn't have art. So again, saving a lot of real estate on your dashboard and not annoying your user with values which are not important. Just a quick note, however, that this using only the relevant values is quite, well, you need to use it sparingly because it is quite hectic on your processing. Because every time a filter changes, it needs to update these lists. So if you have multiple of these, you can only imagine that it might run into a bit of an issue with regards to the performance of your dashboard. And that concludes our video for today. So I'm glad you joined us. Hope you learned a lot around dimension filters. As I mentioned earlier, it is something you will be using quite a lot. Do stay tuned. In our next episode, we will be looking at the measure filter and how that differs from the dimension filter, plus some additional handy tricks. So do stay tuned.